If I had to drive a stake in the ground and say, this is the message to learn in this, you have to trust that you will be the person you want to be. You'll be the person in the future that is the best version of you, even though everything may be different. You're trusting that you'll still make the best decisions and create the best happiness then. I can be the same person at my center, but I'm going to still be very open-minded to all the newness that I may not even anticipate. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Mind Muscle Connection. I'm Joe Klimczewski with Tyler Wiebe. Today, I want to talk about something that I can't even really title well because I don't know what this is, but I'm calling it the immutable you, the immutable you, because you're not immutable, yet you think you are, and yet you kind of are. And it's a really weird dichotomy slash continuum that just ebbs and flows throughout our lives. And I'll explain it the best I can, Tyler, in that if you were to ask my wife, Tracy, are you the exact same person you were when I met you when we were 19 years old? She would say, yes, I am. And I would say, in so many ways, at her core, she is. I mean, her personality, psychology, her strengths, everything about her, she is 100% the same person. And yet 33 years later, 34 years later, she is totally not that same person. And, there is tremendous growth and maturity and worldview change. Just everything has changed. If she could have forecasted her life back then, like, this is where I would be, this is where I would say she's like, yeah, nothing happened like I thought. But I love it. Here I am. So I want to talk about that because I think there are some massive, massive implications even to our fitness lives, my intentional life of health, my career as a pro bodybuilder that has, lifting started when I was 11 years old, and now I'm in a totally different place. Core values still there, but different. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this, just in that there is so much of you that is constantly changing. The future you may be somebody you wouldn't even recognize today, and yet here we are, kind of unchanged.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you had talked to, my 18-year-old self, I'm 30, I'm 34 right now. Yeah, I would have never predicted that I would have been here. And sometimes I still I'll talk with Steph and it's just like, I never thought this is where I would be. This is what I would be doing with my life. Like kid, man, it wasn't even on my radar at the time. And just, it wasn't even a possibility. And I think, you're kind of talking about, Tracy and how she's the same, but not the same, but where she is at in life, is not what she ever thought it would be. And it's kind of just kind of cool about the randomness of life where it's like you all of a sudden have this moment. And so for me, it was Steph, right? And you can kind of look back on those moments and it changed the whole trajectory of your life. And it's like it put you down at a certain path where you still are that basic person, right? Those core principles that I think that nature versus nurture. And I think we are still going to have those core principles, but those little moments in time kind of put ourselves on a different trajectory where kind of the nebulous of those core values is able to change and evolve and adapt as you kind of go through those points in life and those experiences. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking as you were talking about that and how it's just kind of so cool where, yeah, those experiences can kind of just change things, but you still stay the same, but you evolve. It's just this kind of almost randomness that occurs that you're just kind of on this journey.
What does nebulous mean?
I meant
I like that word.
the nebulous, I kind of in the sense of there's this core value of you, but I think it kind of goes on a continuum, right? And it can change, and the core value may not necessarily change, but maybe the outer part of it changes. Is that making sense?
Yeah, yeah, I'm slightly joking in
Being,
that
yeah,
I think of it as kind of an astronomy term, which may or may not be correct. But what you said about it
yeah,
is really a super central part of my thought process in this, in that the core of you is the same, but the maturing and the changing and so forth. I think that's where, if I had to drive a stake in the ground and say, this is the message to learn in this, is that you have to trust that. You have to trust that you will be the person you want to be. You'll be the person in the future that is the best version of you, even though everything may be different. You're trusting that you'll still make the best decisions and create the best happiness then. And here's an interesting way to describe that. When I was a young bodybuilder, every once in a while, kind of in the prime of my life, just strength, everything, I would look at people who were aging and they couldn't lift the same, they couldn't do things. And I would feel profoundly sad, like, oh my gosh, that would be awful. Good thing that's never going to be me. Good thing I'm going to be squatting 600 pounds when I'm 90 years old. But there's this blindness to reality, and yet inevitable sadness about the change and the potential decline. And what I didn't realize at the time, but I learned to, is that your wants, your desires will evolve, and that core will be there. Like, I will always live a life of movement and activity and health, but I don't even want those same things anymore. It's not that I look at them
Mm.
in the rearview mirror with sadness. It's they don't even excite me. Like, I'm glad they did when I was 16 and 24. And that's what you really have to trust, that I can be the same person at my center, but I'm going to still be very open-mindedness to all the newness that I may not even anticipate.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you kind of have to then, it kind of follows the same line as kind of what you were saying for just even me, and going through and starting this most recent contest prep. Like, I very quickly learned that was not something I wanted anymore. And it certainly was a struggle, because it's like, well, do I not want to do this because I'm lazy, or do I not want to do this because I truly don't enjoy this part, or the having this aspect anymore? And it took a lot of kind of wrestling back and forth. But again, it kind of just came down to, all of a sudden there was like an emotional and a logical click, where it was like, okay, no, like, this does make sense, like, this does click with who I am, what I consider important in my life in regards to fitness and my time, what I'm prioritizing, all of those things. But it took 3 or 4 weeks to kind of really work through that, and to kind of challenge myself to make sure I wasn't just making this decision because I just didn't feel like doing the hard work, or whatever, a prep does entail. So it's certainly not an easy thing. And there is almost that trust comes with experience of starting to make those decisions, and kind of analyzing them on that post decision, and checking in with yourself and your emotions, and how it works, with, yeah, what you're continuing to evolve your kind of core principles, or not maybe evolve, but like mold them and refine them, and really kind of get to have a much better picture of kind of truly what those are.
Yeah, I have long had this mantra in my head: live well, die well, live well, die well. And that was part of my interface and reaction to death anxiety and the curse of consciousness, which is mortality, looming mortality. And of course, along the way, I've had parents, I've had friends who have died, who have had diagnoses like cancer, and you see them in decline. And I've always just thought, for the sake of my own mental health, and perennially as a parent, as a father, I've thought, if I'm ever faced with that situation, I want to be an example to my kids that I'm going to live my last few days, my last months, if I had that kind of a terminality, dying well. But what I never really inserted in the middle there was transitioning well, aging well. It was kind of like living to your fullest, totally functionally happy versus death. And now, as I'm seeing, like, wait, I'm making these transitions some of which I think are forced upon us because of age and time and circumstances, even things like kids leaving home, empty nest. And yet, some of those, as much of a grind as they are, I'll tell you one little story here in a second. Um, you have to, with full acknowledgement and awareness, plan ahead for those and literally have that kind of a mantra: live well, die well, live well, age well, die well. Our youngest son was our 24-year-old son, Trey, girlfriend now, last remaining child really at home, not living at home that much anymore, staying a lot more nights away from home. And it was like, oh my gosh, like all of a sudden with 4 kids, em- fully empty nest syndrome is setting in. And my wife and I both went through a full week of like isolated trauma. There were times that I had like cried and dealt with this, and she was doing the same thing, and neither one of us knew that about each other. Then we had this talk, and we're like, well, shit, you were feeling that way? Like, why didn't you tell me? Um, but it's like, but I think we
Yeah.
both, because we had kind of practiced that and talked about it with our other 3 children, you kind of, it's coming, and it's there and it's tough, but you still find your way around it. And you end up on the other side in a perfectly fine, but different place, because you had already thought about the immutability of who you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, change is going to happen whether you like it or not. And it's almost, like you're saying, it's better to be prepared for it than to not, than to almost kind of put your head in the sand, right? And just kind of ignore it and live that just, blind life, right? We talk about black and white and religion versus non-religion and open mind, closed minded. Like there are going to be those differences there where, change is going to happen. And if you're going to resist it to, certain points where, like I said, you're sticking that head in the sand, man, it's going to make it a whole heck of a lot harder for you to, change and evolve. And like, it's just not going to happen. And I think then you almost kind of then start to have, almost like you said, like for the sake of your mental health, like that can be a tough place to be, because I think there is something to be said about like almost tricking yourself into a decision that you think is, the right one. And you so bad want to convince yourself it's the right decision or what have you, when internally, like you can, it's just not right, it does not fit with who I am. And I think it kind of goes along the lines of, you said live well, die well, or live well, age well, die well. It's the same question of, every time I'm in something, I'm like, does this fit with like what I want and who I am? And like I'm kind of always asking that, because living well means making sure that I'm doing the things that are going to be core to me and core to my happiness, and being open to those changes, and like we've been talking about, evolving as we go along. But it has, even for myself, become such a mantra of like, okay, like for the limited time that I have, not just on this earth but in a day, what is my energy being put towards? What is my time being put towards? Like, because that is going then to just drive, I think, everything else, and drive evolution of your change. I think it's almost just going to lead to even more positive changes than you kind of almost have some control over.
Have you ever thought about, because I know you have a father, I'm guessing you've had grandparents, maybe friends of the family. Have you ever thought, when I'm 60, when I'm 75, like that's what I want to be like? Like that person, I really like that person's perspective, and that's what I'm going to be like.
No.
Okay, so I have, uh, and and maybe even earlier. I swear,
I
like,
mean, parts of it, like, yes, there's parts that I enjoy, but there hasn't been like one singular person where it's like, yes, everything.
well, I mean, I'm telling you, from the time I was 5, 6 years old, I have had a weird like external life where I tend to see myself in context with the world, and I do think like that almost
Yeah.
outside of time. And I have had those thoughts, and I've idealized certain people like my grandfather and so forth. I've mentioned a client of mine who I got to watch started working with me from the time he was 55 years old, and I knew him until he passed at 84. And he was just one of my life heroes. He was actually an anthropologist and a social studies teacher just by choice. He was from a family that had so much money. Like he never had to work a day in his life. And yet he went into third world countries for 15 years to
Wow.
teach underprivileged kids, poor kids, just for the sake of teaching kids. Then he came back here, took a role as a high school teacher again, just to influence the next generation. He influenced me. I mean, like he
Yeah.
is one of my heroes. And to see him with incredible intent decide who he was going to be throughout his entire life from 55 forward, it was just it truly was almost divine in terms of like this is how you live well, age well, and die well. Like he just lived that all the way through. And so yeah, I think it helps. You mentioned that it's helpful to be aware and think a little bit ahead. Because then you're not reactive. You're creating that future that you want.
It's yeah, it's so easy to just go with the flow, right? And just kind of let things, just they go, right? Like it's all of a sudden time starts to slip faster and faster. And yeah, you have to be more aware of being more intentional, it seems like you just yeah, because your perceptions are changing. Life is happening a lot quicker. And yeah, I have found though, like I have been now thinking about it a lot more as now, like, I get into my mid 30s and really, I almost feel like for the first time, like start on taking on adulthood, in my early to mid 30s. And yeah, it's an important thing to definitely be aware of, but not to like let yourself get lost in kind of that present moment. And like, it's like plan the next 5 years ahead, but like work backwards and like don't forget about what all these like small things you have to do in the moment so that you can get there. And so you can get there and say, I did live well. It's that little fine balance of not getting caught up in one or the other.
And the final point that I would make, bringing it back to our lives of aggressive health and intentional fitness, is that as that person in my 20s and 30s who thought, man, it would be awful to ever not be doing this, but yet I've learned that your desires, your wants actually change. Um, it's almost more fun at this point. And I think somebody looking from the outside in would say, "Oh, that's cute. That's just kind of compensation and delusion and again, death anxiety." Um, but it's really not, because you can say, "Well, I've done that. I lived that. Like I did that for 30 years. That was fun, but I am having more fun doing more performance type sport things that I can now, and all of the energy and dedication I poured into that, I'm pouring into something else, and it's truly like a rebirth into just a new phase." And so it's not depressing or a sad state of acknowledging dysfunction. It's truly the opposite. And I think you kind of have that one choice to make. It's either going to be one or the other. And if you can anticipate some of those things on the horizon, like you said, work back, like that's who I want to be. And you will make those decisions that make that reality in the future.
Yep. I had something really good to say and then I just lost it. So
Come on, man, draw it back out. It's in there.
yeah, I know. It was something right there on the end too that
Probably regarding your fresh kind of changing thoughts about bodybuilding and career.
well, I think it was, the fun aspect of it. And I think that was something that, I really hinged or like really kind of grabbed onto. It was like all of a sudden training and tracking and all everything became unfun all of a sudden. And I was like, what am I doing? If I'm not having fun, like, yeah, okay, there's always gonna be boring parts, but it was like I don't even want to go to the gym anymore. Like, this is not fun. Like having that stress over my head 24/7. And so I think that that's a very important thing that people like kind of tend to forget is that it's okay to make decisions if you're not having fun to go do something else that you are having fun. You're going to challenge yourself much more if you're enjoying the hard work than if you're not. So, like, give yourself permission to say no if you're like, this is not fun.
Huge point, man. That is a perfect way to end it, especially because again, you're leaning into the future, you're anticipating it. And if you're okay with those transitions, you can save yourself years of agony thinking, I just need to try harder. Like you said earlier, I'm just being lazy. No, it's just like go find something that you truly want to pour your energy into. So awesome chat, man. I know this was kind of a weird esoteric topic, but I think we got our points across. I know you did. So thank you, Tyler. And we will see you guys next time in the Mind Muscle Connection.